Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have a very unique topic that we are going to be discussing today, and I have an amazing, uniquely guest to talk all about it. So we have the topic of sacred geometry is what I aimed for, but what I found was sonic. Was it geometry? Geometry, yeah. And I have our guest here who is going to speak all about this. His name is Eric Rankin. He is an author, researcher, speaker, and filmmaker. Welcome, Eric.
Hi.
Hello. So how did this all get started for you? Let's kind of dive into that.
I've always been a curious person. If I'm interested in something, whether it's religion or ancient history or something, I dive in it both feet. And about 12 years ago, the topic of sacred geometry sort of crossed my path. I've seen that pattern, for the last 30 years of my life. The only thing I have of it is that what most people call the flower of life is sacred geometry. It's the intersection and overlap of circles, but it's very specific in its design. And people would say it's very meditative to draw, that just by drawing it with a compass, that it's somehow opening your mind up. So I experimented with it. I read a couple of books. It was interesting to me, but it kind of just reached a level like, well, okay, there I've learned as much as you can learn. There are books, probably the two most well-known primer books would be by Drunvalo Melchizedek. They're paperback books, goes really deep into the design and the possible meanings of and significance of what sacred geometry is, because this pattern that I just showed you on my t-shirt has been found all over the world before we thought cultures were communicating with each other, which is very interesting that patterns and symbols come to our species long before recorded history as we know it. And we know that about this. Virtually every continent has some version of this exact pattern, whether it's a full circle or just the smaller, what's called the seed of life, which is a smaller representation instead of the flower of life. And I'm like, well, that's fascinating. And I certainly don't have anything to add to this story. You get overwhelmed when you read how much research has been done. And I was drawn to a place called the Integratron out in Joshua Tree, California, or right next.
Okay.
And since then, this is going back about 10 years ago. I'm celebrating 10 years of hosting workshops and research that I've been doing there. And it's a fascinating structure built by a man named George Van Tassel, supposedly with the assistance of extraterrestrial beings in 1953. And it's a two-story domed building. It's an amazing sound resonator, frequency resonator. Potentially, it was an electromagnetic device that was going to discharge enormous amounts of negative ions as a sort of a cellular rejuvenation. When I went there the first time, I had a profound experience. There were gongs playing up in the upper dome part, and I happened to be downstairs, which is where the healing was supposed to be received. Most people stay up top to listen to whatever frequencies are being performed.
Yeah.
And I got all kinds of information about what we would call sacred geometry. I was seeing the flower of life pattern. I was being told things about the Integratron and about frequency that, while I'm a musician, really, I was thinking about frequency in whole different ways. So I went back and kind of opened the door a little bit to diving into more frequency stuff. But as I did, I kept seeing people refer to sacred geometry and the frequencies of geometry. Pythagoras himself, a lot of people are familiar with the quote, music of the spheres. But the whole quote is actually, there is geometry in the humming of the strings, and there is music in the spacing of the spheres. And my research, ultimately, why I've been on shows like Ancient Aliens and and Gaia TV and made these films that I did, sonic geometry videos that you can find at sonicgeometry.com, is so much information started coming through, but in it seemed to be related to sacred geometry. More importantly, after the first video came out in 2013, I believe it was, I met an artist named Michael Evans, lives in Southern California where I live, And he introduced me to a shape that made sacred geometry jump out of a 2-degree plane of existence and into 3, and actually, as Buckminster Fuller would call, 4D plane of existence. And I'm going to be sharing those things with you as we talk.
That is interesting. So when you were in this, it's like a dome, you were saying, in Joshua Tree itself. I mean, the energy there is electric,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I personally have never been there, but even just thinking about it, talking about it, I can kind of feel the energy coming in, right? It's just this, it's hard to describe. So I'm just getting chills even thinking about the experience that you had. So did you have a healing from that experience?
A healing in a physical way, I can't, well, actually, that is not true. Now that I recall back, I can't believe this, and there's a truck backing up. I don't know.
I thought that was here. That's okay.
I did, actually. So
Okay.
I had to read, even 10 years ago, I'm 61 now, 51 then, and prior 5 years before that, I started to need to wear reading glasses. I wanted to read fairly small text. And after coming home from the Integratron, from that very first session, I went back to read some stuff. I was sitting in my back patio. It was bright daylight, but still I would need my readers. And I'd forgotten them as I went to sit in the lounge chair with this book. And I opened up and I could find that I could read this text perfectly. And I'm like, holy, is this related to the Integratron? And the effect lasted for maybe a week or so, and then I went back to needing glasses, but there definitely was something that happened immediately following my experience at the Integratron. So, and then as far as opening up to what became these videos called Sacred Geometry, that definitely is related to somehow the Integratron. Of all the research I've done there, personal experiences that are literally kind of out of this world, involving sort of what you would call extraterrestrials. I have never seen any type of being I would call an extraterrestrial, but I actually think that much of contact that you might want to call extraterrestrial or multidimensional or something we can't explain, off-planet contact, is just happening directly into our minds for people who are even unknowingly ready and willing to receive information. We're looking for, even though we're seeing them now, the Pentagon here in the United States is releasing information about UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon that we can't explain, that is flying in ways that we have never manufactured a craft at speeds attain. It's an exciting moment, but I think that our quest for meeting another species that still is in physical bodies using propulsion systems and ships are probably just a next level of us. The higher advanced beings are just, we don't need any of that. We're just going to come communicate with you.
Yeah.
And I believe that, and I believe I've had many of those experiences, and truly what became the sonic geometry videos was such an intervention at my office of all places. I'm wearing a tie and not a suit, but business clothes. And I heard a voice speaking for a collective, go into your conference room and to the whiteboard, and we're going to give you some instructions. And the first one was to draw a triangle. And I drew it, and I'm like, I have no idea who I'm hearing from and why I'm listening and why I'm willing to do this. But I drew a triangle, and I hated math in school, failed geometry, algebra. That is not was not my field at all. So this information coming to me was pretty crazy. And I just followed the guidance of this communication process for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. And this whiteboard this ginormous whiteboard ended up looking like the movie A Beautiful Mind. I didn't know if I was going crazy or something really significant. And since we produce those videos, physicists, mathematicians, people from all over the world in the millions have watched these videos and said, absolutely, there is significant mind-blowing information, to the point where the first half of Pythagoras's quote, there is geometry in the humming of the strings, or vice versa. There's harmony in the geometry. Incredible to me, I'm the person that discovered what those harmonic intervals were revealed in geometry. And it ends up being what we call a major chord in music. It's what you hear If you're a musician, when you hear a song start, it's almost any song start. If it starts in a minor key, your longing and urging is to hear it resolve itself in a major key. If it starts in a major key, it means things are going right. In a movie, couples falling in love, the king and queen are being announced, the war is being won, whatever. So we almost seem to have this programming that tells us that a major chord is an affirmation of this is correct. This is something to remember in a positive way. And of all things, geometry reveals that exact major chord. So that's pretty much launched me in a way that into a direction I never imagined my life going.
That's incredible, because see, you think of sacred geometry, it's symbols, shapes, it's two-dimensional, right? That's all we've ever really experienced, right?
Most
And that
people,
makes
yes.
sense, right?
Mhm.
But now I have this feeling that it's coming up, and that's, I feel, why I've been drawn to record this episode.
Yeah.
And I know in your videos you were talking about the significance of 432. Can you
Yeah.
explain a little bit about that?
Well, 432 is really interesting, and it launches one of the most incredible mysteries I think there is on this planet. Mythologist Joseph Campbell, who wrote the books about the hero's journey, he also discovered that many cultures, on top of their myths, had numerical codes in them, and he called it mathematical mythology. And he was really shocked to discover same number sequences, and they could be with decimal points or zeros behind them, but the actual number sequence, 432 being one of them, 72 being one, 144, 360, all these numbers kind of jumped out at him, but 432 was the number that he found most often. He goes, what is going on with this number? And he could never really answer his own question of why that number was so significant. The time since his death, there's been a lot of research and people going back to holy sites and sacred temples, even like the Great Pyramid of Giza. And if you just create a percussion inside the king's chamber, this is supposedly the burial chamber where there's a box that looks like a coffin. All experts now are pretty much agreed on that the Great Pyramid of Giza was never a burial chamber. There are no markings in carvings, paintings, anything that would suggest other burial chambers like King Tut's, full of artifacts and paintings and history. And a famous recording artist, Michael Halpern, went into the king's chamber and just slapped this granite sarcophagus, just moving air inside the chamber, and it made a tone. This whoa, 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 whoa. That tone, 432 hertz. That's just, and octaves of it down. An octave is mathematically exactly half or exactly double, but musically means the same note down the scale, or up the scale, up the scale. So 432 half step down is 216. 216 is a significant number, and then half again is 108. There's 108 beads in a mala necklace. There's 108 shows up. If you've ever seen Buddha, where he has what looks like little curly locks of hair. Yes.
You can't really see it, but yeah.
Those are not curly locks of hair. That story is, instead of the big, happy, bald, fat Buddha, this fit Buddha is when he was supposedly meditating in the hot sun. And he was so connected to nature that snails noticed him sweating and one by one climbed up his spine and positioned himself on his head to cool him. So those little curls and circles are actually snails, and there's 108 of them.
Interesting.
It is like we are being clued in without knowing that we're being clued into something significant. And 432 seems to be the key that turns a lock, that opens a mystery box that just keeps going deeper and deeper. Speaking of the Great Pyramid of Giza, if you take its perimeter at its base, lay it out on a straight line and multiply that straight line times 43,200 of its length, you get the circumference of planet Earth. And if you measure the Great Pyramid of Giza from the ground to its tip and multiply that times 43,200, you get the height, not diameter, the radius of the Earth from the core to the polar. So there is some form of communication that has been happening through numerical codes and clues, and 432 seems to be right in the middle of it.
So that then leads me to believe that this isn't something that came from Earth. This isn't something that originated here.
I believe that it's both coming from Earth as its source of information, but able to make sense of it is not from here. That there is an intelligence that predates us and is still with us and still communicating with us through these number sequences, trying to get our attention. And I believe that ultimately what the significance of 432 will be as a frequency. Tuning our instruments to 432, which many used to be. We can find ancient instruments from indigenous cultures, like flutes that still hold their tone. And we find this, it's very crazy because we tune, the 432 happens to be an A right in the middle of the keyboard, right above middle C. That's what we tune in Western tuning all over the world. All symphonies, anybody that plays what we call Western tuning music is based on that middle A. Well, there was a time in history when that middle A was 432, and it's called classic tuning, but we ended up kind of fudging it up to 440 vibration cycles per second. And then we even did something else that took us further off the track of the mystery, is we have this tuning process that we call equal temperament, where we fudge all of these precise intervals as nature would reveal them to us. We fudge them so they would sound good to our ears, but in nature, it would not sound good. And the higher up in octaves you went, if it was low here and was slightly off, by the time you keep expanding these harmonic intervals, they become not even harmonic at all. Like if you were a dolphin listening to tones, not in the low hundreds of cycles per second, but in the tens of thousands of cycles per second, and you started at this dissonant way we tune instruments, there would be nowhere close to a harmony or nature. And dolphins would just go, what is that noise you've been exposing yourself to?
Yeah.
You know,
Are you listening
to modern music? Yeah.
Yeah. That is interesting. Now, in your videos, you did mention that there was an interdimensional race that came to Earth and brought this knowledge and this information, tried to teach it to humans.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
That race is known as the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki over the past 6,000 years have kind of gotten a bad rap because supposedly there was the old story of good and evil battling itself out even then. There were creator gods. The story is we are their creation. And it's very interesting that even if you go back to the book of Genesis and reread it, rather than just skipping over it, you realize there's a plurality there. It's like we are making humans in our image. And it starts with Adam, but people who follow the Anunnaki story is like, it's not a singular Adam, it's the Adamic race. Right. And it was humanoid creatures that mated with female beings that were here that were humanoid enough to procreate with, and we are the engineered outcome of that process. Now, what's really interesting for anybody rolling their eyes here about this Anunnaki story is that 6,000 years ago, now we can go back way past 6,000 years ago and find mysterious anomalies in our history. The Sphinx in Egypt. Most researchers now think that it's way older than 6,000, 5,000 years old, that it's maybe 12,000 years old. And this is proven by the erosion down its back, that was water that kept eroding. There's a temple in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe that is about 12,000 years old, that was buried by people after they built it. They buried it in a mountain that looked so big and natural that no one ever thought to look for an entire, more or less, city underneath it. I mean, it took more effort to build the mountain than to actually construct this elaborate temple complex down below. But in recent times, let's call it humanity's reboot. 1,000 years ago, archaeologists pretty much agree that our species all over the world was hunter-gatherers. We were living a very simple existence. We weren't farming. We had to follow clean water. We had to follow living food supply. We had to follow food that we could gather and turn into meal or store. very rudimentary, transportable, simple housing, clothes made out of animal skins, all over the world. Up until about 6,000 years ago, that's the human experience. Then in one place, in one time, Sumeria, ancient Sumeria, where modern day Iraq is, we get this explosion of technology. And when I say an explosion of technology, it's not the tweaking of pre-existing technology, it's technologies that did not exist, as far as we know, on the planet. And that includes a written language, a unique counting system, a
Right.
loom to weave fabric, a pottery wheel to make pottery, the arch, the plow, the wheeled and axled vehicle, a sailboat, a pyramid building, running water, multi-layered, what we would call a residential neighborhood with
Hmm.
buildings. All these things just showed up like blink of an eye in one place. And we can read their text. We can read these little tablets that we wrote, and we just found them about 70 years ago. We did not know they existed. And there's tens of thousands of these because they were baked. They're about the size of an iPad, and they were written on with a stylus, and then be hard. And we found a bunch of them, and we can read this language called cuneiform. So if we read into it, we go, how did they do this? How did they create advanced mathematics and language, and written language, and all these inventions? And they said, we didn't. Visitors came from the sky that we call Anunnaki, the royalty who came from the sky, or relatives of kin that came from the sky. And they showed us, they taught us these things. So you can roll your eyes at this, or you can say that is a real mystery. And they actually explained it in a way that was not mythology. They understood mythology. They wrote the first epic myth called the Epic of Gilgamesh. So they knew what storytelling was and myth, but they never represented what their discoveries and how they came to be as myth. They said these were creatures, humanoid, very tall people that came from the sky and shared this information with us.
That is very interesting because it does follow a lot of the teachings and lessons and things that I've learned and I've been reading about and kind of following. And yeah, it's humanity, I don't think could have evolved the way that it has without external help.
There are physicists. I'm friends with a physicist named Nassim Haramein. He's kind of a rebel physicist, believes he has actually solved the holy grail in physics, connecting microphysics, quantum level physics to big level physics, astrophysics.
Mm-hmm.
Those two aspects of physics work fine independently of each other. They don't communicate with each other yet. We can't apply the rules of quantum physics in the very small particle physics to huge physics. Right. And Nassim believes that he has gotten the formula to do that with. And he said on my radio show, I have a radio show called Awakening Code, he's in the studio, and he said, if you just took cell division the way it's been taught to us and try and just create one aspect of us, like a human eye, this thing that's capable of focus and light and sending electrical impulses to a brain that can then reconstruct that in darkness. There's no light coming through our eye. It's brought back into electromagnetic signals that travel through our optic nerves into our brain and reconstruct it as color and form and dimension. And he goes, you just try and evolve an eye randomly, that alone would take you hundreds of millions of years, much less its connection to everything else. Yet, if you have some sort of external source that is either guiding the process very slightly, and he compared it to a blind person solving a Rubik's Cube. Give a blind person a Rubik's Cube and say, hey, solve this. Millions of tries and wouldn't even know if he did it right. But if you have someone on the outside, almost like saying, playing the warmer, colder game, move just got you a little closer. Oh, that move got you a little further away. Just a little bit of guidance, and all of a sudden, a blind person can solve the Rubik's Cube in 5 minutes. So that's what he believes as well, that there is an external intelligence. And by external, it's also internal. It's a communication band like an infinity loop that's, yes, it's outside of us, but it's also passing through us, almost like a biofeedback intelligent loop. But there is an intelligence out in the field that's circling its way through our design and then back into the field to pick up more information and then back through us.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I'm an actual believer in the engineer story. There was a kind of a scary movie called Prometheus, where there were engineers and they would find planets that could support life, and they would sacrifice themselves, and all the little DNA strands would go down in the water and the air and create life. But if you really start to think about our experience, that we have bodies that require certain nutrients and minerals and nutrition that come from plants, and that we have in us a swallowing system and a taste bud system and a nasal system that gives us smell, and then think that there are these plants out there that not only provide the nutrients that these bodies need, but they happen to be in these delightful, colored, wonderful smelling, tasting, bite-sized, hand-sized packages. That tells me that there is some sort of
There's a big connection. Yeah.
scheme of our whole experience.
Yeah.
Like trees. Trees breathe in what we breathe out. We support them, and we breathe in what they breathe out.
Yeah.
To me, that is not by chance. That is all a part of a grand engineering scheme. So whether it's the big G God or the little g gods that used information that we don't yet have access to, but we're getting closer to by the day. I mean, we cracked the DNA sequencing code, that we can clone. We're becoming close to these engineering sky traveling gods that we said couldn't have existed 100 years ago. If we fly to Mars, we'll be extraterrestrials on Mars.
Yeah.
So the idea that, to think that it's ridiculous to imagine visitors, I think is almost a moot point these days.
You can't deny that there's got to be other life forms or energies or beings out there, because we have one small planet, but when you look out into the universe, you look outside at night, you can see billions of stars. Like, explain who's living on those, who's living over there, right? Like,
right.
You can't say, those are just balls of light.
Right. Statistically, it would seem ridiculous to assume that we are the only planet orbiting a star supporting life. That's statistically, I think, is just almost absurd to imagine. When you talk about those billions of stars and potential billions of planetary systems, that's just in our little galaxy. Now there are hundreds of billions of galaxies that the Hubble telescope, the day that they discovered that, I was shocked. I think I don't remember how old I was, in my 20s maybe, and the Hubble created this field of, they took a postage side stamp photograph of deep space where they could see nothing. In their most powerful land-based telescopes, it was a piece of sky that just looked featureless, black. And they focused the Hubble telescope on it for days. And when they got the picture back, they thought, oh my gosh, look at all those stars. How could we not have seen them? They weren't stars, they were thousands of galaxies in this one little teeny piece of space that looked black. So yes, the idea that there statistically must be life in other dimensions, I think, is almost a no-brainer.
Yeah. And, speaking of lives in other dimensions, we know that there's many people out there who can connect with this energy and can translate it and interpret it and speak it out. And on your website, you actually have a channeled message to humanity that really piqued my interest. So that's something that I definitely want our listeners to go to and check out and listen. But I just kind of want to touch on it for a little bit and just figure out, like, how did this message come to you? Who is this person that shared this message with you?
Well, I have been, quote unquote, I don't know if you want to use the word contacted, but I definitely, or downloaded, or channeling, or something has happened to me maybe. Well, no, it's happened quite a bit. I have to admit it now, that from when I used to say it happened once, it happened twice, a few times, now it's happened quite a bit.
Yeah.
The sonic geometry information was channeled, downloaded information. And at the end of both of those videos, I got the feeling like we're setting ourselves up to be aware of the geometric, frequency-based, mathematically perfect essence of our lives, and that there's an intelligence that already knows this and wants to communicate with us. And us learning about sacred geometry, sonic geometry, sound frequency, and all these things, that we might be preparing ourselves for this grand moment of contact where it just becomes irrefutable that we're hearing from and receiving information from a higher source.
Mhm.
So the first two videos end that way, but the third video is actually one of those conversations. Like, if you're prepared enough and willing enough and feel safe enough, we're going to share not just the keys and codes of the communication process, but you're going to actually hear now a communication. You're going to hear a message. And that message came through. I don't remember it exactly, but it was like one of revealing ourselves. You have called us many things. You have known us in many ways. We have been monitoring your existence for a long time, not only monitoring, but are a part of its creation story, all for the good. You have, as humans, have an important role to play in the grand scheme of things. You have free will, you have choice, you have struggle, you have emotion, you have weak forces. You feel things, you get sick, you live in these bodies that are pretty messy, excrete all kinds of fluids and things.
Horrible.
But you have something to add to the story that we know we abandoned and we can't get back ourselves. And frail, almost suffering, what is the purpose of those things? And so in our wondering, what could be the benefit of suffering, of frailty, of sickness, of death, of any fear? We're going to create you that's going to experience those things, and not just the scary parts, but also all the beautiful tactile things that we no longer in our light bodies can do. We can't touch a tree, we can't smell a rose, we can't go swimming. You are that species that not only does all those things like other animals, but you have a consciousness capacity to think about your experience and what part might you be playing in the grand scheme of things. So it was like more or less almost like a welcome, like, yeah, we're here, we have us who are communicating with right now. There might be other forms of an extraterrestrial intelligence that might think the entire universe would be better off without us, because it's like, if you just give somebody free will and it's a struggle to survive, they're just going to kill each other off and ruin their planet. And
we almost did.
May be wrong. If you said, if you're worried about like the Greys, or if you follow the the extraterrestrial pantheon of all the different characters in the grand space opera, there's the good guys and the bad guys, more or less. And the bad guys are like, wow, let's get rid of or control the humans.
Right.
It's like, well, are you good guys or bad guys? And both of them think they're the good guys. The ones who want to see us awaken and fully understand who and what we are and where we came from, and keep expanding into unity consciousness throughout the entire galaxy and universe, serve that. That's really what we were going for. And the ones that think, no, they're just going to screw it all up, also think they're doing the right thing by throttling our experience and keeping us under control, because we're just a danger to ourselves and we're a danger to our planet.
Well, I mean, at one point you could agree with that, but I think at this point now, enough people are waking up that and seeing the reality that what is actually happening is this energetic pull, this ascension, right? We're rising up. And
definitely happening.
Exactly. There's no stopping it. The momentum is so strong behind it that it's just, we don't even have to try anymore. Yeah.
And it might not require as many people as you might think to create the shift. The number 144,000 keeps. I was going to ask you about it. And in the Revelation Bible story, it's 140,000 people that ascend directly to heaven, while everybody else got to fight Armageddon down here on Earth. But 144,000, the ascension process is just learning the secrets, learning the keys and codes, and applying them the correct way to shift an entire planet full of almost 8 billion people. You don't need everybody. You just need enough. So that's what gives me hope, is we're not trying to shift a majority. We're not trying to fight in the polarity. We're calmly holding a space as information is coming to us, and we're seeing that it connects, reverberates, synthesizes with itself in the most beautiful way. And that is truly what we're awakening up to. And I have lots of little models to show you the geometric aspect of that patterning, and I don't know how long we have, but I want to make sure we get to them.
Yeah, and that's just it. Is it the sacred geometry is literally the building blocks of all of this. Like
I believe so.
it, that's where it all began, and we don't understand it because we just go about our lives, living our lives as robots. But until you stop and start asking questions, start looking into things, then you're going to start discovering this amazing work that you have been working on.
Well, I'm hopefully about to blow your mind and anybody that happens to be watching.
Please, yes.
When we talk about sacred geometry revealing the sacred, intimate, mathematically perfect design of all things, I think is correct. But if you're just talking about this two-dimensional version of what sacred geometry is, you're just going on a gut feeling. You are not seeing what I believe sacred geometry is trying to convey to us. So I will take people back to the movie Contact, if you remember that. And Jodie Foster, one hears information and they download tens of thousands of pages to build a machine, but these pages of information don't make any sense to them. And she goes to the billionaire who has funded this research, and he goes, "You're just not thinking like the intelligence that sent you this information. You're thinking of it like flat pages in a notebook, and they're thinking multidimensionally. So until you think multidimensionally, you'll never figure it out." She goes, "Well, there's no clue, there's no primer to give us what this multidimensional, message is." And he goes, "There is. There are registration marks on down in the corner that don't look like they mean anything, but they open up dimensions." And that's the same thing with sacred geometry. So let's take one petal. So sacred geometry, we'll understand, looks like flower petals, 6 flowers that repeat. And so let's look at one of these flower petals. Looks just like this. Now, interestingly enough, to be sacred geometry, it has to be a certain arc. It has to be 60 degrees of arc. And in my 2 videos, I discuss pretty much at length why and how 60 is such an important number to us, even today. 60 is a number, we deal with 60 seconds to a minute to an hour, and 60 nautical miles to 1 degree of latitude and longitude. And we measure things by 60, and yet we have forgotten why it's important. So you take this shape, and I mentioned this artist, Michael Evans, who lives not far from me, never heard of him. And he said, "I don't think it's this shape." He goes, "I think it's this shape, that it's multidimensional." And it doesn't hit you right away why this might be so powerful, but I will explain why. Here is the holy grail of geometry. If you talk to physicists, mathematicians, people that study, because many people now agree that, and we're talking top level researchers, agree that there is a geometric aspect to our universe. And we think that because it seems like plants and growth follow a geometric structure. Flowers and whether it's the Fibonacci spiral or the heliacal coil or anything, they're following geometry as if the geometric grid is there. It's just invisible, and they're just moving into it. So here is what experts will tell you. This has to be what the most basic element, meaning it is the holy grail of all geometry, structural geometry. This is called a tetrahedron. It's structurally rigid. It's very strong. It's stronger than a cube. It satisfies many interesting things, but there are people like Alan Watts, I don't know if you know who he is, a British philosopher, did a whole lecture on what is our obsession with straight lines when everything around us in nature seems to be wiggly. That's the word he used, wiggly. Trees and sky and ocean waves and mountains, everything is wiggly, us. And yet we're obsessed with ironing out and straightening up and straight between us. It's because it's easier. It's easier to start in straight lines and hard, rigid angles and flat planes and like this than it is to imagine something else. So if the world is wiggly, and then Walter Russell is another famous philosopher and geometer who was a friend of Tesla back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. In his research, he said, all direction is curve and all motion is spiral. Well, if all direction is curve and all motion is spiral, this is wrong. This doesn't invite curve or spiral in it. And yet this is what we think the universe must be based on, is a tetrahedral design, because it can't get smaller. It can't get smaller than this. But if you curve the lines, if you feminize the lines, if you soften the lines and start here, you can make a smaller geometric form. And it satisfies all the requirements. It has surfaces, it has edges, and it has points. So this shape, which Michael Evans called the Tryon ray, has surfaces, has edges, and points. But it has only 3 edges and 3 surfaces and 2 points instead of 4 edges, 4 surfaces, and 4 points. So now this is all of a sudden being called, could this be the God particle? What is this shape and how does it work? Well, let's take this shape and overlap it into this sacred geometry design. And before we do that, because we're going to show you how one of the most famous philosophers, mathematicians, geometers, Buckminster Fuller, arrived at something that became an obsession of his. And he started with a natural phenomenon called the overlapping, or the closest connection of spheres. So these are styrofoam balls. You can do this with quarters. You can do it with any round object. But if you put one in the middle, 6 will go around it perfectly and not only touch the middle, but they will touch each other. So this is the beginning, obviously hexagonal design, built from feminine geometry. We call feminine geometry if it has curve like this.
Yeah.
And he said, what if we stack 3 balls to where now they're also touching the middle, but they're also touching each other. And then you take 3 more again and put it on the other side, it reveals this structure. And structure is the smallest thing. It's 12 balls around 1. So it's a total of 13, which invites Metatron's cube, which is 12 balls around 1. And what it launches in straight line geometry is called the vector equilibrium. And it's this. I took those balls and spread them out in straight shapes, and there's 12 vectors. And what is so unique about this shape is that it has a true center point that no other solid geometric form has. It has a center point where every line coming out of it is the same exact length and offset by the same angle. No other geometry has that in elemental geometry, and this has it. Well, what if this, in all of its beautiful, and Buckminster Fuller said, this is the geometry of creation. This is God's design. This is what the universe is made of. But there's a problem with it. He went from curve and he went back to straight. Because it's easier for us to grasp. What I think is really trying to be exposed from this, using the same exact model, is taking this for every one of those straight lines, this pulse wave, and building this.
Okay.
Same exact model. It has 6 squares and it has 8 triangles. It has the same center point, but now everything is a pulse and a wave and like a dimensional vibration instead of straight lines.
So it's more feminine in nature.
Absolutely, from the get-go. And if you can see it, it has these 4 radiuses now. We no longer have straight lines. There's a pink orbit system, and here's a green orbit system, and a yellow orbit system, and an orange orbit system. And if you could take all the white pipe cleaners away, you would see the model of what we call an atom. You would see
it's the building blocks of everything.
You would see protons and electrons orbiting and a dead center. So all of a sudden, and then like, well, what does this reveal? So let's take this star pattern shape, 12 vectors coming out. Each vector is now dimensional instead of just a straight imaginary line. What you have is this. This is the core, and I call this the Genesis structure because this can't get any smaller. It's perfectly balanced. It follows Buckminster Fuller's design, has all the radius. And if we connect it, we had exactly what I just showed you. If we put all the connections on the outside, we have those orbits. Now, there's a point to all this. My mind gets crazy. I'm going to show you this model. And you can maybe see that model again, that star cluster hiding in there.
Right at the beginning, yeah.
So what I did is I just let myself follow the geometry of this unique pattern, and I just kept building and building and building up with it. And I lifted it off the table, and hiding in it was the 5 in 2D.
What?
So you can reverse engineer from 2D to 4 dimensions, 4 orbits, or start Buckminster's pattern with the Tryon ray design, and then get yourself back to the primer.
I love that you use gold in the bottom.
Yeah, it reflects. When I share this, I don't always share it because it's kind of fragile and it's years old. But when I take that and do lectures with it and show all these models, ooh and ah, there's a collective almost gasp in a room when I reveal this structure revealing sacred.
It's so simple. Like you don't think that's even the part of the flower of life, because the flower of life, it looks so beautiful and intricate, and we just take it for what we've been told that it is. But yeah, actually you took it a whole step further.
It's holding way more information. It all of a sudden opens doors to where, if these are pulses or vibration pulses expressed in their simplest geometric expression, which can't get smaller than 3. If you go to 3, then you're back to 2 and you're in 2D flat sacred geometry again. In this design is not truly only 3D. It has 4 axes, not just 3, not just height, width, depth. It's this unique balance of 4, but it ends up explaining so many strange things because it invites entanglement. You can see that these are overlapping spheres. They're not spheres that are just statically touching each other.
No, because they're connected.
They're overlapping. So when we overlap and we use the word entanglement, like mind, telekinesis, or sensory perception, that is entanglement. This geometry not only supports the geometry, it supports the micro and the macro. I have one last, where is it? So here's an even more complex structure of showing that this is much bigger. It's the same little star pattern, way
beautiful,
little thing, but it's expanded out twice, and it can expand out infinitely and be the exact same pattern, made up of its exact same pattern. And every one of these little balls, the nodal point, is launching the exact same pattern. So the implication is, if you are one of these balls in this geometric matrix that is infinite, you are the center of this geometric model, because you are one of these 0 points that expands out from you, observing all the rest of it. It opens up a huge thing to contemplate.
I know. Now all I'm going to be doing is thinking after, because but that's the thing too, is like with quantum entanglement, that's what we're stepping into. That's the next phase of human evolution. We're already starting to know what people are thinking. We can read a person just from looking at their body shape or their language, right? That is the first step. I'm getting chills even thinking of it, of telekinesis, of not telekinesis, telepathic.
Both telekinesis, both. If you are in a quantumly entangled universe, thoughts, I don't think it's impossible that the energy of your thoughts can merge and move with the energy of what we call a solid object. There is no such thing as a solid object. You just keep looking smaller, smaller, smaller. You just find atoms in us and atoms in other materials. So I'm constantly thinking back. Jesus is a mystery to me. His healings and the things he could do and the miracles. If somehow were a master of understanding the quantumly entangled universe, you could do miracles, because they would not be miracles. They would be things that are perfectly explainable in a quantumly entangled universe. And here's the model. I just showed you the model that I believe, and I had one of the world's top physicists was visiting me before he was a guest on my radio show. And came to my apartment where I'm sitting right now. He looked at these models, first said, "Where'd you get your physics degree?" And I said, "Well, I've never taken physics in my life." And he was impressed, and he says, he was looking at the big model I just showed you, and he says, that is the most beautiful model of the quantum entangled universe I've ever seen. So
Yeah.
this is, his name is Manas Kafatos. People can look him up. He's a real guy, and it's a real experience I had. Other people were in the room that can corroborate the story. But it solves so many problems. This vector equilibrium matrix holds all other geometry. It actually will hold a cube. It will hold the tetrahedron. Here's a small model of it right here. And
Ooh,
if I
what kind of stone is that?
just right, this is like a marble. If I hold it just right, it's very easy to see the sixness of the hexagon.
Almost
But
look like a
the,
Merkaba.
if I hold it another way, and I just have to keep spinning it to find it, you will see the fourness of it. You will see,
Oh yeah.
looks
Yeah.
like a cube. So this will hold the 3s, the 4s, the 6s, the 12s that other geometric forms won't hold, meaning it will hold those forms perfectly inside of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I call this the mother matrix.
Yeah. So where do you see all of this taking us as humanity? We're getting droplets of this information here or there. People are coming together. We're putting the pieces of the puzzle together. But where do you see this taking us?
To our next level. I mean, truly, that's the way I end my lectures,
Yeah.
is all of this information right now. We have sort of ignored the keys and codes. We have ignored the 12s that are all over the world. And it's with us every day. A dozen donuts, 12 months, 12 astrological signs, 12 gods, 12 saints, 12 disciples. We've been ignoring. Why 12? We don't even think about it. And the 60s, I mentioned some of the significance of 60s. We ignore those as well. And it's like the communication has been happening. And what I explain it to people, have you ever heard of an escape room?
Mm-hmm.
So
We
escape
have
room,
many of those, yeah.
yeah, they're like an entertainment venue. You go into a place that was designed by engineers
Yeah.
that it's a often cramped and scary sort of place, and you have a time limit, and codes and clues are all over, hidden in plain sight, all over this room. And if you figure out how to apply them, you get to up level. I think that's exactly a micro version of what we are living in. A macro version is these codes and clues have been all around us for thousands of years, waiting to be applied the correct way. And when we do, we will up level. We will escape this particular system. It doesn't mean we leave the planet. We will escape the duality, escape the division, escape the idea that we kill ourselves to bring peace, escape the idea that we can pollute our home planet and keep living on it. That's what I think, and that's where I think we're going, that when we apply this information in the way that it was meant to be applied, whether it's in physics or sound frequency or geometry, we are going to somehow be expanded just in our way of thinking or rationalizing or understanding, and we will up level as a species. And that's my hope. That's why we'll keep doing this until I'm no longer on the planet. And 10 years ago, I didn't know what sacred geometry was. So I'm on my purpose and mission.
That's an accelerated path that you're on then, really.
It has been accelerated, and yet it hasn't been beyond my ability. There are times when I don't get information and I feel like, oh, was that it? Am I out of the stream? Am I not getting any more because I didn't share enough, or did I not do as much work as I
integrate it?
It's almost like, no, it's kind of to keep you sane.
Yeah. Yeah.
If too much information, I'm kind of convinced, if too much unfiltered cosmic information comes in, we might call that a psychotic breakdown.
That's right.
People on the street that are just like,
yeah,
the star people are coming down in the geometric forms and all this, and you just go, okay, yeah, maybe, right? You think they're crazy? I think they're just receiving too much information before they have the capability to deal with it. And so I'm actually grateful for the pauses and the resting periods and the meditation cycles that I can think about this stuff rather than just being bombarded with new aspects and parts. It comes, but it comes in a way that I can deal with it now.
Yeah. I really appreciate that you said it that way, because I find that in my own journey as well, is that there's all these times where you get all this information and everything kind of floods in, and then it's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of question yourself, did that actually happen? Was that real?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Right? So yeah, no, I
We
really
might be saying that about our Earth experience once we're off of it. It's almost
100%. Yeah.
a lot of people are looking at this COVID experience and almost looking at their lives pre-pandemic and with this feeling like, did that even happen? I mean, the things we used to do, the holidays, the way we used to do it, all that stuff, was that real? And are we creating some new system for ourselves where we do things differently? I think it's very possible in a positive way, not in a, gosh, we're locked down, we can't do the fun things. We're just not going to be locked into the cycles where we did those things without even knowing why we did them anymore.
Right.
Shopping and all these things, we are going to open up to a new bandwidth of experience and information.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's this new higher energy, that form of intelligence coming in, that it's coming into our cellular body. It's coming into us, and that's how we're connecting to it. And we just don't realize it because nobody's ever explained it to us like that before.
I think, and I think we're just getting started. If you
Yeah.
really think about our species, if you go back 6,000 years, we didn't have the written language. We didn't have the technology. Not even the rudimentary aspects of it. We want to think, oh, we're so advanced. Our experience here as modern humans, modern civilization, is only 6,000 years old. It's the blink of a blink of a blink of an eye in the grand scheme of things. So I would want people to almost be hopeful and give ourselves a break that we are maybe just taking our first baby step out of the fear-driven existence, running away from the saber-toothed tiger and having each other for food and land and resources, that we can move into unity consciousness where we will just wake up and, like that dream state, go, is that the way we really used to do it? If we had a disagreement, we just killed each other?
I know.
And we were doing it in the name of peace?
Like how, yeah, when you put it like that, that is exactly what we were doing. That was how it was presented, but we didn't think of it that way. Like we just thought, well, this is the way it was always this way. So this is the way it's gotta be. Well, I'm sorry, but the COVID is, how can I say this? The changing experience. This is what needs to happen.
It could be pivotal to the Great Awakening. There's unsettling things that are going on, Canada, United States. I mean, all over the world, there's a lot of unsettling resistance. And I think rather than the resistance, consider it that this could be, because it is a global event. It is affecting everybody on the planet. It's like the first thing other than a world war. And there's plenty of countries in the world wars that weren't involved at all. This involves everybody. Nobody's not heard of COVID. Nobody doesn't hear the stories of people either dying or one cause or another, or whatever it is. But what it has done is brought us all into a same moment talking about the same thing. And that is a potential for something very profound, because what if the new same thing we start talking about is unity consciousness? How do we get out of this and not build a world that's just ever more divided and blaming and shaming and all that? These models, to me, with the 0 point, all these models share one thing. They have the 0 point perfectly in the middle. That's the neutral zone. Like in Star
meditation,
it's neither this side or that side fighting. You need the center point, and this side and the opposite side, exactly opposite. You need that balance. You need that structure, but you don't need the charge of hate and blame and shame and divisiveness.
And it's interesting because, meditation, that's the whole point, is to come back to that 0 point neutrality where everything is just okay, and there is no charge of emotion. There's no electric charge this way or that way, exactly the way you explained it. That is beautiful.
Your eternal self, if you believe in it, and most people do in one form or another, most people, your eternal soul has zero fear about COVID, vaccines, wars, death, anything. If we
because it's not about that.
Fear of death and attach to your eternal soul that already knows it's connected to the whole thing, that it is already living in unified consciousness. It's just allowing us in our physical form to try and figure it out and hopefully get to the same place, merge our 3D existence with our, maybe you call it your 5D existence. That's the shift. That is the beginning of the Aquarian age, whatever you want to call it. And I believe we are vibrating. There's a tension that wants to just go, okay, we've done this long enough. Let's go and pop. And the people that are outside of this model, on the furthest fringe of this model, kind of goes back to Jesus' words that sound kind of mysterious. The last, meaning the people on the outside, will be the first after the pop.
Yeah.
The fringe people here will be the first in organizing the new reality and understanding it and creating a whole new matrix of living around it.
Like you.
I hope it happens. I'm gonna die believing it's possible, and we have hope.
Yeah, well, because everything that, if you are awake, if you are looking, if you are asking questions, if you are consciously connecting to your higher self, or whatever method that you do, you can't deny that things are changing. And all of these prophecies, like, that have been told, especially the Nostradamus, those are doomsday ones, but we've passed that timeline. We've passed that point in history, and yet we're still here.
Right.
So there's something bigger that's coming out of this.
Well, we'll just take the word apocalypse. I mean, the apocalypse has been sold to Christians as the end of the world, the apocalypse. That's not what it means at all. It's a Greek word that means the great revealing. So I would think we are in the great revealing, and we're not ending the story, hopefully. And same thing with the Mayan calendar. Everybody, doomsday in 2012. They never said that. It's like an odometer in a car. It gets to 100,000 miles and shifts and
just rolls over.
Yeah, I think that's much more realistic. But I do think we want to be conscious of our power of creation. We are now aware of the powerful creators we are. We can manipulate genetics. We can manipulate DNA. We can clone. We can copy. We can do all these things. We need to be pretty on point with our consciousness to match our technology. And that kind of brings an invitation into the AI world. Everything is sort of a double-edged sword and opportunity from here, with great stakes and, with great responsibility. And so with great wisdom comes great responsibility, or however that saying goes. We're so much more informed than we were even 50 years ago, but certainly say 500 years ago, when people were arguing about religion and science and how things worked. We know a lot, but we need to apply a lot we know into the unified field, not into the division field.
Yeah, and that's just it. And we don't want a repeat of Atlantis, period.
Right.
That's just it, right?
And that just ends the story quickly. That ends the story quickly. That is the great ending that just says, and even then, Atlantis wasn't an ending. It was setting the stage for a reboot.
Yeah.
I'm not a complete literal, Atlantis believer, because it's hard to, but allegorically, and I believe that so many important stories are allegorical, including the Jesus story, just great information that came through. But the Atlantis and the Lemuria stories are offering us keen insight into managing technology with consciousness for the greater good of all, meaning all things in all dimensions. If we can't do that, we are heading to a short story. It just says, all right, A-bomb.
Yeah, no, we did that. Remember Hiroshima?
Yeah, we did that.
We did that already. It didn't work out very well.
We don't want to keep doing that. It's poisons for the people it doesn't kill. If you did a whole giant nuclear war, it would make the planet uninhabitable for most species. So it's we want to take what we've learned and apply it in the best way we can apply it. And the best way we can apply it is to think about everything. Everything.
Because we're connected. And that's the thing with sacred geometry, is that it shows how everything is connected, intertwined. And you mentioned infinity symbol, and
in multi-dimensions.
Yeah. Well, wow. That's all I have to say. Well, I want to say thank you so much for coming onto the show, for just sharing your information with your work. And it's definitely solidified a lot of the things that I believe myself. And it's really, it's interesting that you were mentioning earlier that you were never into math. You were never into geometry. That wasn't something that you wanted to do in this lifetime, but yet your path took you there. So would you, what advice would you have for somebody that's, in that place where they they've never ventured into this kind of world before, but they feel the pull, but they're having that fear. Like, what advice would you give them?
I'd say consider yourself way more special than you might think you are, because I think every living human on this planet and potentially other species, dolphins and stuff, have all the hardware and software they need to up level or support the up level experience. We have a pineal gland. Mammals have a pineal gland that seem to serve different purposes. And I believe that it is like a little receiver right in the dead center of your brain that looks like a little pine cone that reveals this structure when you get down to it, counter-rotating against itself. That's what the pineal pattern is two spirals counter-rotating against themselves based on that design. We all have that ability to receive the information. So whether it happens in a quiet meditation, or it happens in the way you live your life, or the things that you learn, but just believe that you are entirely capable and worthy as much as anybody is to receive the information and start implementing it. And simple again, do unto others. That would a very simple place to start. If you wouldn't want to be treated a certain way, don't treat other people that way. That's the beginning almost of unity consciousness, is to have reverence for the reverence you want for yourself. Have that same reverence for others. That invites you into the field. And I think from there, you will not be let down by the way you will be guided on a path of expansion, exploration, mystery, awakening. It just comes. You don't even have to really work that hard I didn't. I'm no genius for sure. I sold boats, for most of my life for a living and playing a band. Certainly nothing related to this, and yet the information came. Yeah. So if it comes to me, I think it could absolutely come to anybody and beyond. I mean, I did this leg of the work knowing that I would not be able to take it to the next level, but there are physicists and technicians who have taken this information and applied it to next level things, which is what I always thought and would hope would happen, as long as it was for the greater good.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything. And I look forward to following your work and see what else comes from it.
We'll just see. The videos take a long time to promote, but I'm always finding some way to share. I share small. I think there's nothing wrong thinking I should be reaching millions or tens of thousands of people. I'm comfortable in reaching the people who I reach in organic conversations, and something like this didn't exist. Who knows how many people will watch it? But I think we've been conditioned somewhat to think we need these mass numbers to have effect. I don't believe we need the mass numbers to have effect. I think the right message and the right information is far more important.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much. You have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.